Welcome, everyone. My name is Darren Q, and I am the Dean at the Kroc School of Peace Studies. We are extremely pleased to welcome you here tonight to our distinguished lecture series with Paola Ramos. Before I hand off to my colleague to introduce Paola, I want to just take a moment, first of all, to thank my colleagues at the Institute for Peace and Justice, Dr. Andy Blum, who you'll hear from in just a moment, Ashley Boren, Brianna Mauby, Alejandro Cervantes, and everyone over at IPJ who made this event possible. I think many of us, after the elections last fall, have been very much focused about the changes and the situation within the Democratic Party and what's happening on the left. But of course, with the iron frame of the two-party system in the United States, we also need to be thinking, regardless of which way you may have voted back in November, we all have to be thinking about what's happening in the right and within the Republican Party nowadays. The changes within the Republican Party are just as momentous as what's happening in the left with the Democrats. The divisions between MAGA Republicans and conservative Republicans are playing out very much here in Southern California. Coming from Massachusetts, of course, I think of California and Massachusetts as sort of the heart of the traditional conservative wings of the Republican Party. I think what's happening here is really important for the rest of the country. And of course, there's no group that is more important in Southern California, in my mind, than the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic community. Understanding what's happening here politically, and particularly in terms of Latino drifts to the far right, is just an essential piece that we need to understand. And the implications are for much broader than just the right or the Republican Party or the left. It really has implications for the entire country. So we are really, really pleased to be able to welcome Paola Ramos here tonight. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Please keep us in mind at the Kroc School. These sorts of events that are connected to what's happening here in San Diego are essential to our mission, and you are essential partners for everything we do. So welcome, and I want to introduce my colleague, Dr. Andy Blum, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Justice at the Kroc School. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren, and just echoing my thanks for all of you coming, finding us in our new theater here. We usually can claim priority for the Kroc School Theater, but the Board of Trustees are an exception to that. So we thank Souls for welcoming us into their theater, which I'm enjoying being here. You know, Darren just talked about our mission, and I think it's important to think about the mission of the university as well. I've been talking to my colleagues about, you know, now more than ever is a time where the university needs to live up to its mission, to think more deeply about the issues in the world around us, to not be part of the churn of opinions we see every day on social media, but to dig deeper into complex issues. And I think our speaker tonight really exemplifies that. She did take an issue that was in the headlines, you know, why this shift of some Latinos to the right, but she explored that question by bringing in identity and history and religion and trauma and created a really deeper understanding of that issue while eschewing easy answers or simple answers. And that's why I enjoyed reading the book so much, and it's why I'm so excited to hear Paola talk more about the book and her research tonight. In a moment, I'm going to bring Paola out, but just to give you a little sense of how tonight's going to work, she's going to talk, and then I am privileged to be able to moderate a Q&A with her after that. I'm a little nervous because I'm interviewing a professional interviewer up here tonight. It's like cooking for a famous chef, I suppose. You are welcome to provide questions as well. I know you should have information on how to do that, but just so you know, if you haven't, on your cell phones, slido.com, SLIDO.com, and then the code is 216-4244. 216-4244, slido.com. Okay, so let me introduce Paola Ramos. She is an author and Emmy award-winning journalist. In fact, we just found out that just this morning she was nominated for 2 additional Emmys. She is a contributor for Telemundo News and MSNBC, where she's the host of Field Report and a former correspondent for Vice News. Her reporting has taken her from embedding with migrants in the Darien Gap to interviewing cartel members in the US-Mexico border region to deeply exploring Latinos' shifting political identity across the nation. Prior to her career in journalism, Ramos was the deputy director of Hispanic media for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, a political appointee during the Obama administration, and served in President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. She's the author of the best-selling book Defectors, which she'll speak to tonight and which many of you have now. She's also the author of Finding Latinx: In Search of Voices Redefining Latino Identity. She's a former Hauser leader in the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard Kennedy School, where she received her master's in public policy, and recently joined the board of trustees of her alma mater, Barnard College. She was born in Miami to Cuban and Mexican parents, grew up in Madrid, and currently lives in Brooklyn, New York. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to Paola Ramos.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. You're right. I am not used to receiving the questions. I can't wait to ask you questions. I'm also not used to being on this side of the podium. I want to grill every single one of you, and I have a million questions. But yes, like you said, I'll be talking for a little bit, providing a little bit of context, and then we'll get into the conversation. And more than anything, I'm excited to get into these questions with you, no? Again, thank you for making the time to be here. I know there's a lot going on, and there are a million things that are on people's minds, and so I never, ever take this for granted. And thank you. Gracias. Okay, so I want to begin tonight, not within our borders, but by taking us outside of the United States. I want to take us to the Caribbean province of Colón, this tropical region that sits by the Caribbean Sea. And so Colón, this province in Panama, Colón used to be this incredible focal point of enslaved Africans that were brought to Panama during the transatlantic slave trade in the 16th century. So this region, which is beautiful, no, again, right in front of the ocean, this region right now, I believe, is turning into this point of liberation, and I would say almost a point of empowerment for thousands of migrants and asylum seekers that as I'm speaking right now, are actively self-deporting from the United States, are choosing to go back to their homelands, reverse migrating, transiting through Panama, and in that process are slowly letting go of that American dream. And so I believe that is an image that is not at all in our heads, no, but to me, that is an image that I believe tells the story that is unfolding in the United States. And so let me take you to exactly where I was less than a week ago, last Thursday. So last Thursday, I'm in the province of Colón. I'm in this small town called Palenque, again, right in front of the ocean. And so I'm standing in front of a group of over 30 Venezuelan asylum seekers that had self-deported from the United States, and I'm watching them as every single one of them is putting all of their belongings into these small plastic bags, right? So everything that they had at that point, which is a little bit of clothes, a couple of dollars, some food, and everyone's putting it in these plastic bags. And so then I'm watching them also, and I'm perceiving how all of them were paying $280 each to these coyotes that are in Colón, paying them $280 each to be smuggled through the Caribbean Ocean on a 12-hour boat ride that would take them all the way from this sort of beautiful, provincial coastal line of Panama all the way to Colombia, to the coast of Colombia. And that 12-hour boat ride, I have to say, is really important because it is the only way for migrants to bypass the treacherous and dangerous Darien Jungle. Now, that Darien Jungle that, of course, is that 12-mile corridor that sits between Colombia and Panama. It is a jungle that millions and millions of asylum seekers have crossed, through the years to attempt to reach the United States, attempting to go north. But what I saw exactly last Thursday and on Friday was the complete opposite. I saw, at that point, it was beyond 30 people, but I saw a lot of people that were choosing to go south, choosing to go all the way back to their homelands. And so I mention all of this because I feel that in that moment, in Panama, I was able to grasp once again, the sort of profound effect of what's at stake in the United States. This idea that miles and miles away from where we are, that can have this seismic shift in American politics. The migrants that I saw right there were people that many of them were self-deporting from the interior of the United States. Many of them had been waiting along the US-Mexico border for months, and come January 20th, they decided that, of course, they couldn't do it anymore. Every single one of those migrants that I was seeing in Panama had either been taking buses from the interior of the United States, from Mexico, buses that took them all the way from Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and then Panama. Many of them were fathers, many of them were moms. I saw children, some as young as 5 years old. But every single one of them was waiting in that Panamanian town to, again, take that boat that would allow them to bypass this jungle and get them closer and closer to the United States. And I asked them, before they got on the boat, I asked them, why leave the United States? What made you decide to leave the United States? Of course, many of them were simply tired of being criminalized, tired of waiting in limbo. Many of them did have tattoos, and so this idea of Bukele kept coming up. They did not want to be sent to El Salvador. Many of them, of course, said Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. Those words kept coming up. But the overwhelming response that I got from them, when I was asking that very simple question, why, ¿por qué te vas? Why leave the United States? The response to that, I believe, is a lot more profound. And it is this idea, this notion that many of them were simply letting go of that idea that imposed their trek north. That they were simply letting go of this belief that the United States is a land of possibilities, and that this is a land that is just and free and equal, and a land where every single being, regardless of where you come from, can actually succeed and have a dignified life. And they were completely letting go of that idea. And again, I mention this because I do believe that it has a seismic shift, This idea that suddenly immigrants are letting go of what imposed them north, That they no longer want to look towards the United States, That they're letting go of this American dream. And so, to me, that is an incredible question, because in the gaze of immigrants, in my eyes at least, they hold sort of the ideals that are supposed to push this country to be a better version of itself, In their hands, I believe, as they're trekking north, they understand how sacred freedoms are and rights are. They understand how sacred that American dream is. They understand how sacred that aspiration is. And so again, what happens when immigrants stop looking north? When they let go of that. When I first wrote Defectors, The Rise of the Latino Far Right, in many ways, I wrote that book because I was perhaps naive enough to believe that as Latinos, or as the descendants of immigrants, I believed that we would never forget why people trek north, that we perhaps were loyal to that journey and loyal to some type of solidarity and loyal to that story. And of course, it turns out that that story is a lot more complicated, and that as people we're a lot more complicated, and that something happens the moment that once you trek north and you step into the United States, something happens. Defectors, of course, the title in and of itself is based on this idea of defecting, What does it mean to defect? To defect means to abandon a presumed loyalty to something or someone or an idea. The story was, allegedly, that as Latinos, it went, that we were not necessarily loyal to a Democratic Party. Just forget about that for a second. We'll talk about that. But more than anything, that we were loyal to a certain set of ideals that revolved around achieving greater justice and freedom in this country. Ideals that I believe kind of build on that migration north. The story went that we were sort of key components of this multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition, that was supposed to be pushing, sorry about this, that was supposed to be pushing this country towards a certain direction, The story went that as our numbers grew, so too would sort of the United States' chance of becoming that better version of itself. And the story also went that in the implausible scenario, that this country were to be faced with, say, a candidate that was promising mass deportations and criminalizing immigrants and joking around being a dictator, someone that hinted at this idea that they would defy the Constitution, the story went that as Latinos, we would sort of rise up in these unprecedented numbers in the face of someone like that. Of course, fast forward to, first, as a show of hand, when we knew the results in November 2024, just to get an idea, who here was surprised by that? Okay. Well, not as many. So me neither. We'll talk about that. But okay. So fast forward. Then we weren't surprised, I guess, that much. And so what we find out is that two things can be true at once. That yes, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris overwhelmingly wins the Latino vote. But it is also true that the man that promised mass deportations and that believed deeply in the Great Replacement theory, and that the person that was talking about immigrants as if they were animals, that person was not only able to get around 45% of the Latino vote according to exit polls, that person was not only able to get a majority of the Latino male vote, which we'll talk about that, that person was able to do significantly well with immigrants. If you look at the reporting and all the reports and the data that's out there, there is a direct correlation between the heavy immigrant counties across the United States and Donald Trump's gains. Naturalized Americans were actually a source of immense power for Donald Trump. I mean, from Miami-Dade County, which is where I grew up, all the way to Imperial County. These are counties that are predominantly Latino, full of first, second, third generation immigrants, and Donald Trump, as you know, became the first Republican presidential candidate in over 30 years to flip those counties. And so I think perhaps some people were surprised. It sounds like we were not, because, but let's think of why, Because I think if we are true to ourselves, and we think about closing our eyes the last 8 years, and we think about kind of like the voices, the key voices around us, I think we were all sort of noting these very subtle but telling signs around us. This idea that suddenly this anti-immigrant narrative was spreading like wildfire across this country, including in some of our spaces. This idea that anti-Blackness was becoming more and more prevalent. Particularly, I think we really, really start to see it in the midst of 2022 during this whole like tough on crime narrative. This idea that the transphobia has completely unleashed. That's not new, that's been happening. Suddenly, as you're walking into evangelical spaces, the notion of Christian nationalism kept coming up. And I think a lot of people didn't really know exactly what it meant, but they were curious about it. They were okay with the idea, just like I think a lot of people were okay with the idea of Donald Trump as a strong man, una persona con mano dura. We didn't really know exactly what it meant, but we were kind of okay with it, And I think, yes, had we closed our eyes in the last 8 years, then it was pretty evident that there was and is a very small but growing group of Latinos that were shifting to the right, that were defecting, again, not necessarily from a Democratic Party, but defecting from a story, a story that is based on this premise that our fates are bound together, that we were all collectively pushing this country towards a certain version of itself, And in this version of the story, we believed, the story goes, that we as Latinos and as the descendants of immigrants would not succumb to the forces of white supremacy and racism and nationalism. No, that's sort of how the story went. And of course, fast forward to where we are now. It's, what day is it today? It's May 1st, 2025. And here we are, no, collectively staring at a country that has a government that is actively defying the Constitution, the courts, the Supreme Court, a government that is actively dismantling the federal workforce, withholding key federal funding for things like cancer research and incredible scientific research, for example, that takes place in this very institution. They're withholding all of that. And this is a government that we're collectively staring at that is sending immigrants to El Salvador without due process, deporting American citizens as young as 2 years old, trying to get rid of birthright citizenship, silencing some students, immigrant students, for voicing their First Amendment rights. And of course, I believe a government that is very seamlessly defying the rule of law because I think they fundamentally believe that immigrants don't necessarily belong in this country. No? So it's a very seamless battle. And so it is within this image, and within this context that I think as Latinos, many of us are sort of now able to hold this, this mirror up against us, no? And kind of trying to understand like the full reflection, no? Of who we are. What does it mean to be one of the over 60 million Latinos in this country right now? How have we changed? How have we evolved? What unites us at this point, if anything? Or are we more united now than we were before? What does it mean to be one? What does it mean to be part of one community? I think these are all questions that are finally coming up, no? I think in that reflection, what I've learned over the years is that, yes, there is a majority of Latinos that do see the sort of beauty and resilience that hold us together. I think many of us see that. But I have also learned through the years reporting that there are so many people out there that are seeing completely different things, no? I have met Black Latinos that see themselves as white in that reflection. I have met Mexican Americans that see themselves as the original Spaniards and the original conquistadors. I have met brown extremists that see themselves as white nationalists. I have met countless Latino men and women that, for instance, don't see the humanity in trans people or in queer people, and so therefore within that reflection, they're simply invisible. I have met many Latinos that see Donald Trump not as a threat, but actually as a savior to democracy. I've met many first and second generation immigrants that do not want to be called immigrants. No, they don't want that at all. And so again, within that reflection, the question for us is always like, what are we seeing, no? And at what point did it become so fragmented? And so of course, we will be talking about that question, no? We'll spend the next 30, 40 minutes having a conversation around the why, no? Why, and is there this alleged rightward shift happening among Latinos? What is at the heart of that? All of this, I believe, is up for debate, which is why this is such an interesting conversation. No? Is it a matter of economics? No? Is that why Donald Trump did so well among Latinos? Was it the fear-mongering, the anti-immigrant rhetoric? Did something there really kind of stick with us? Was it the transphobia? And or was it, like I argue in my book, perhaps something a little bit deeper, no? This idea that as Latinos, I believe that there are some cultural, psychological, and historic forces that may be pushing some Latinos towards the far right. And I think what I mean by that is that as I'm thinking of the migrants that I was with last week, for instance, no, as migrants, no, as our people are coming north, we're not just taking with us this American dream that really fuels us, no, and that really impacts us, but we're also taking with us racial baggage from Latin America, sort of this colonial mindset from Latin America. We're also taking with us this political trauma, and none of that, the truth is, none of that manifests neatly in American politics, no? Part of that is also understanding that this is all part of our history and our past, no? These are things that we have to learn more deeply about, and I think this past and this history that we bring with us in our quest to find belonging in this country, I think that past and that history at times allow us to corrupt our own version of the American dream, no? That allow us in perhaps this process to assimilate in this country. It sometimes allows us to find something in white supremacy and in racism and in xenophobia that may be more familiar to us than we even want to sort of concede. No? And again, we'll talk about all of this. But I also believe, no, and this is the message for all of us, and more than anything, I think this is what the activists in the room would tell you, is that this does not mean that as Latinos, no, we have to be shackled to that past. No? I do believe that there is an ability to sort of keep looking north with our own vision, no, clear-eyed, and with our own gaze. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that by sort of closing with this other story that I had to report on 2 months ago. I'll try and explain it. So exactly 2 months ago or 3 months ago at this point, January 20th, time right now, like I don't even know if it exists, but January 20th, the day of Trump's inauguration. So the day of Donald Trump's inauguration, I find myself in Miami at a January 6th pardon watch party. It's exactly what it sounds like. Yeah. Yeah, exactly what it sounds like. No, January 6th pardon watch party. That was that party was taking place in Miami, and not far from Miami's Little Havana, in Calle Ocho. And this party was full of Latino Proud Boys and insurrectionists, and it was hosted by this guy called Gabriel Garcia. Now, Gabriel Garcia is the son of Cuban immigrants. He is a very, very proud boy. He stormed the insurrection. In fact, there are videos of him storming the insurrection, very proudly, walking inside, calling for Nancy Pelosi, saying things like, Nancy, come out, Nancy, come out. No, he is in the front lines. And so Gabriel Garcia, that day, was wearing his court-ordered ankle bracelet, because of his actions in January 6th. And so had Donald Trump not been in power right now, Gabriel Garcia would be in jail. But that day, Gabriel Garcia was waiting anxiously for Donald Trump to pardon him. And when I talked to Gabriel Garcia through the years, I asked them, why did you storm the Capitol? The three most common things came up. This anti-immigrant sentiment. He fundamentally believes that this country is being invaded. He believes it. He mentions things like traditionalism. He's really scared around this idea that traditionalism, and these like traditions and marriage, like all of these things he feels that are sort of like dissipating. He mentions communism, of course, right? He fundamentally believed that were Joe Biden to win again, that we would be living under a communist regime. But more than anything, Gabriel Garcia, when I asked him how he was feeling that day, he just kept saying that he could not wait to live in Donald Trump's America, that he fundamentally, like, truly believed that he belonged in Donald Trump's America. Fast forward, it's the inauguration, and of course, by like 6 or 7 p.m., after Gabriel Garcia kept saying, I can't wait to be free, I can't wait to be free, when can I mean, he had his scissors, with him, because he could not wait to cut the court-ordered ankle bracelet. By 6, 7 p.m., I believe, like, Donald Trump pardons everyone. So we literally see Gabriel Garcia, he grabs the scissors, cuts the court-ordered ankle bracelet, he gets in his truck, he drives away, and the first thing he does is that he literally drives all around the state of Florida, picking up other Proud Boys that had stormed the Capitol that were now being released. He was extremely happy. He kept saying, soy libre, soy libre, soy libre. No, I'm free. I mentioned Gabriel Garcia because when I was in that boat ride in El Colón, in the province of Panama that I was just talking about, when I was watching those migrants sort of getting on the boat and sort of taking this boat ride, which was kind of liberating for them, because in a way they felt something different. When I was there, I kept, unfortunately, thinking about Gabriel Garcia. Like, unfortunately, right? Like, I don't want to be thinking about this man, but I kept thinking about him because I kept asking myself, like, does Gabriel Garcia today, does this man feel free? In Donald Trump's America, like, truly, like, is Gabriel Garcia free? Like, because I kept thinking about him and sort of, everything else I was watching. I was like, does Gabriel Garcia feel free? Because as far as I know, Gabriel Garcia is someone who is because of the color of his skin, could perfectly be racially profiled, particularly in what Florida is looking like right now. No? Because of the tattoos that Gabriel Garcia has, he is someone that could potentially be deported or detained, and at least if he was Venezuelan, for sure he would be on some list. Gabriel Garcia is someone who is looking around his other Cuban, like fellow Cuban Americans, and they know that Cubans right now have been completely rid of the opportunity to have humanitarian parole in this country. As far as I know, this country is starting to look a little bit more like the very Cuba that Gabriel Garcia's families fled from, no? Where this idea of dissent is starting to disappear, where freedom of speech is something that we can't even count on, with the freedom to organize that doesn't exist in Cuba. And so I kept thinking, like, again, does Gabriel Garcia feel any freedom? No? Does he feel more empowered today than he did when I last talked to him under the Biden years? And so I say this because I definitely believe that we are on the verge and we're all staring at a country that is literally on the precipice of changing in ways that are unrecognizable. I mean, I'm not old or that old at all, but I believe that it is something, at least that in my lifetime, no, it can become this unrecognizable country, no, more violent, more oppressive. But I also do believe that as a community, particularly like as Latinos and as immigrants, I do believe that we hold an immense amount of power to sort of shift the trajectory of this course, no? I think all of this requires us to understand how we got here. It requires us to look at the full picture of who we are, the beauty and the darkness, no? the everything that we see about our future, but also everything about our past. It requires us to be able to talk about, yes, the easy stuff, no, and to champion ourselves, but also all the uncomfortable things. But I think more than anything, it requires us to remain very, very grounded in that initial idea that I think impulses people north to begin with, no? That essential idea that is truly about what so many of those migrants were talking to me about, no? This idea that was perhaps now gone, no? That in this country, yes, you can achieve greater liberties and freedoms. And I do believe that Gabriel Garcia, when he is alone, and I explain to him what that idea really means, I know, because I've seen him, I've seen who this man is without the cameras, no, without the Trumpism and without the flags. I believe that people like him, even those that are all the way on the far right, can actually see themselves in that vision, no, and understand something a little bit more there than what they believe they understand in Trump's America, no? And perhaps in that vision, then we can really, really reiterate how profoundly dark it is for people to stop looking north. And so I cannot wait to get into this conversation with all of you. Can't wait to discuss, for the pushback. There's so many questions, more than answers. And again, thank you so much for your time and for engaging with me. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to start by grounding us here a little bit where we are. And you talk so eloquently in the book about the complexity of the Latino community. We're here about 10 miles from Chicano Park. We're about 25 miles from the Mexico-United border. We're on a part of California that used to be Mexico. And so kind of in that political complexity, where do you think our region here fits? Like where is that in your picture?
I mean, I think here you find the glue that I think holds a lot of people together, no, which is the identity. I think one of the things that we're seeing is how far removed and how easy it is, I believe, for many Latinos to sort of forget, no, where it is that we come from. I think if you look at the numbers, right now, you know, the fastest growing group within Latinos are third generation. The majority of people speak Spanglish, more English than Spanish. The majority of people are now under the age of 50. And so I think here in California, what you find is a deep sense of connection, I believe, with the history, with the community, with the movement. One of the things that I think about right now, as you're asking me that question, is a couple of weeks ago I was in this car ride. I was going from LA towards the Central Valley, and I was talking to Jimmy. And Jimmy he's undocumented, and literally in that car ride, he told me that he was thinking about self-deporting. And then there was this like beautiful transformation as we were going like towards the Central Valley, because then you sort of, we're looking to the right and you could see the farm workers. We were looking to the left, and I was having a conversation with Isabela, who had just protested in a march a couple of months ago. I turned on the radio and it was like Radio Campesina. And so I think I almost was able to watch Jimmy like change this like deep disillusionment into, again, like finding his identity in this state, because I think it's so rich. And so at least, coming from New York and traveling across the country, I feel like in California, there's a deeper sense of identity, and obviously what like self-determination means, which I feel like has become very lost, among some communities, and very lost for many reasons that, we can talk about.
One of the most, I think, compelling parts of the book for me, and you mentioned it in your talk as well, is this idea of the mirror and what we see. The line of like, others may see me as black, but I see myself as white. I guess the question that raises for me, though, is an organization like the Proud Boys. Like, I understand why Enrique Tarrio would want to join more now that I've read your book, but why is he accepted? What did you learn about why those groups?
That's the question. He's not accepted,
okay.
Right? It's an illusion, right? I mean, one of the most interesting things about Enrique is that when Enrique Tarrio, I think this is like 2020, right? So Donald Trump loses, Enrique Tarrio, who is the former chairman of the Proud Boys, because he stormed the insurrection, he had the longest sentence from anyone else. What's interesting about Enrique is that Enrique basically is used by Trump, and he becomes this like token Latino guy in Miami-Dade County, right? And Enrique's tasked with winning the Latino vote for Donald Trump, and Enrique kind of rises in power, through the ranks of this like Trump Boys Club. What happens though is that when Donald Trump loses, one of the first things that the Proud Boys do, this guy Kyle Chapman, he starts talking about Enrique, and he says, again, mind you, Enrique Tarrio is black and Cuban, He's Afro-Cuban. So one of the first things that the Proud Boys say and do after Donald Trump loses in 2020 is they say something along the lines of, the West, like basically something along the lines of like, in this club, only the white race belongs, the West belongs to the white race and the white race alone, and we owe nothing to anyone else. And they literally cut ties with Enrique. And so all this to say, I think that is the question for Enrique Tarrio, for Gabriel Garcia, Of course, a lot of people in these like white supremacist nationalist groups need them. They need them to shield them from being accused of being racist or being white supremacist, and Enrique Tarrio became the perfect face for the Proud Boys, because he was a black Cuban, son of immigrants. But when it comes to truly asking them, are you more powerful now? What does that feel like? It's not there. And I'll share one more thing. When I was in Miami, after this terrible January 6th watch party, I stayed a couple of days later. Why? Because it was the grand welcoming of Enrique Tarrio, right? Like Enrique Tarrio had just been released from prison, and like all of Miami was going crazy, and they were like welcoming him. And so he was doing this like press conference, and there's like all these cameras, and Enrique, he kind of looks at the camera and he says, I can't wait for Donald Trump to like hire me, essentially, right? Like he's not even kidding, but he genuinely believed. He starts kind of joking, but that's his style, right? He's like joking, but not. And he says some things like, I may have, tal vez tengo un puesto, en la Casa Blanca. And I'm like, all right. Of course he doesn't. He doesn't. I mean, so no one has called Enrique ever again. But that's the game. They're needed, but they don't have real power.
One of the things, and I think it relates to that story about sort of the, speaking to Donald Trump through the TV, this idea of the strong man, this idea that Trump represents that strong man, and it relates to the machismo you talk about in the book. I think sometimes machismo is used as almost kind of a simplistic explanation, like a catch-all explanation, but this idea of needing that strong man, of wanting to be macho along with the strong man, like what role does that play, and what role does maybe gender more broadly play in this shift to the right?
I think the strongman appeal is interesting for, I think there's two reasons, many reasons, but two that come to mind. One, perhaps less related to gender, no? But the first, so one of the things that the Democrats would always do, at least a lot in the East Coast, no, and a lot in Miami-Dade County, is that they would try and cast Donald Trump as a strongman. And the strategy in their head was that by casting Trump as a dictator, un caudillo, or a strong man, their thinking went that there would be this like allergic reaction in the Latino and immigrant community, you know, that people would be like horrified by the idea of Donald Trump as a strong man because, of course, of many of our histories with these very complicated authoritarian regimes throughout Latin America. It turns out, yes, that is true, but it also turns out that there is a large population of us that have this very complicated relationship with strongman rule, because I believe that we have also been conditioned to believe that when like democracy feels messy, you know, and when there's like violence around you, we've been conditioned to believe that strongman rule is necessary. And that was happening a lot. No, there you can start to understand this fascination with Nayib Bukele. No? Yeah. And we can get into that because he's obviously now such an incredible player in American politics. But so I think there's that aspect of strongman rule where I think a lot of people, after hearing this narrative of the fear mongering and that the immigrants are in your house and that they're coming to get you, people said, mano dura, I want that. On the other side, then there's kind of the aspect of gender. Gender, I think, played an immense role, but particularly through the way that they weaponized transphobia. They ran with two things. One was this extreme anti-immigrant message, which of course we're very familiar with, and the other one was this deep transphobic narrative, right? There's two images that they wanted us to see constantly. One was Haitian migrants eating pets. No, they kept blasting that. And the other one was this idea of trans people being pedophiles. You know, trans people being pedophiles that would go and walk and sort of, do scary things to your children. And that was everywhere. You know, those images were everywhere. And the transphobic thing, I think, worked extremely well to this day, because I think it invokes a type of moral panic, particularly among some Latino men. This moral panic that I think kind of disorients these like gender norms and social norms in the face of an America that is like changing very fast, and where gender norms are changing very fast, and in the face of this perhaps rise of like this black woman in power, no? And so through this like transphobic narrative, I think a lot of men felt that they could not allow that to happen, or that it was too sort of crazy for them. And so it works, because now if you hear Donald Trump's rally, like the one that he did in Michigan, people didn't clap when he talked about the economy. They were almost silent until he talked about immigration and trans stuff. Then they go wild, no? And so it is, it works, and it works because it is the key to, they use elements that dehumanize people. And once you're able to dehumanize people and people's like imagination, it's very easy to get people riled up, no? And they do that really well.
I think this links to a fascinating question from the audience, and that's, what does research say about Latino LGBTQIA plus shifting to the right? Are we seeing any sort of parallel trends in that community?
I'm not gonna lie, I don't have enough data to, I think, give like a concrete informed answer. So I don't know. I will say that I think the shift happened across the board, no? It happened in immigrant communities, it happened among women, that's what the numbers show, it happened among men. I've seen white gay men that have shifted to the right, and so perhaps I would imagine that there's like some of that happening, but I don't have enough like research to know exactly within the queer Latino community, like if you're seeing those changes. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good question though.
It is a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you to whoever.
Yeah. Next book. Okay. No way.
One of the things we haven't talked about, but it's I think a fascinating section in your book is the role of religion. Yeah. And a question And you talk about the role of religion in the U.S., but one of the questions from the audience that I think is interesting as well is, what's the connection between the rise of the Latino far right in the United States and the rise of the evangelical church in Latin America? Is there like those ties happening?
I think it's completely connected, and I think, I mean, it requires so much more research, but I'll give you a just very quick anecdote. So now that I was in Panama and in Costa Rica, I was, I mean, literally in the most, and we were just talking about this, I was in the most rural towns in Panama. I mean, like it was, I mean, I barely had internet connection all over the country and also in Darien. Literally everywhere I drove, I would see American evangelical, like small, I wouldn't even call them offices, but there was definitely a lot of like propaganda, there was advertising, there were like small little like hubs. They were everywhere, no? So I think the American evangelical movement has, I think for decades, no, sort of really penetrated Latin America. There is a Latin American evangelical boom. In a place like Guatemala, I believe like 40% of the population is now evangelical. In Brazil and El Salvador, around 30% of the population there are now evangelical. And so there is this rise of evangelicalism in Latin America. Many of it is influenced by sort of American evangelical missionaries. And so one of the things that is happening is that, of course, through decades, when a lot of migrants have been coming to the United States, of course, they come with a lot of these evangelical beliefs. And of course, many of them are Catholics, but Latinos are now the fastest growing group of evangelicals, no? So the conversion rates are huge. One of the first questions I always have with a lot of like mixed status families and immigrants that just arrive is, you know, what is the first thing you do when you come here? Typically, it's encuentro comunidad, no? I'm trying to find my community. Typically, that also entails you go to the church, no? And the church is a beautiful, sacred place for many people to find community. Now, what I have been seeing, and I think many people here perhaps have different experiences with it, is that these safe spaces that have become very sacred safe spaces have become very politicized, extremely politicized over the last years. I've seen it very clearly in the Rio Grande Valley. I've seen it in Sacramento a lot. And Republicans have understood, that there is a lot of potential there, that there is a lot of potential to mobilize Latinos. And you look at the numbers, and the numbers have shifted. Not only are we now the fastest growing group of evangelicals, but now the number of Latinos that find the idea of Christian nationalism appealing is also rising exponentially. And so the white Christian right has understood that potential. Now, there's a reason why Donald Trump starts his evangelicals for Trump in 2020 in Miami-Dade County. He doesn't do it in Pennsylvania or Ohio or Indiana. He goes to Miami-Dade County and specifically starts targeting Latino evangelicals, because there they understand that there's room for growth. And one of the other things that I'll notice quickly is that the American Christian television industry, which is massive, of course, has also understood that there is a huge potential in the Latino evangelical audience. And so now, Daystar Television, which is based in Texas, for instance, this big Christian network, as of the last year and a half, they started doing Spanish language TV content, which fuses sort of these, big religious content with news. And their numbers, again, if you look at them, they're rising and they're rising. So I think what's interesting there is to observe the way that, yes, that these spaces are being penetrated by the white Christian right, because there's potential.
And how do you think that sort of the evangelical movement, that Christian right you talked about, how does that map on to that story you talked about, that story, that traditional story of looking north, of that sort of aspiration of, is that in conflict? Is it in tension? Is there ways to line those stories up?
I mean, I think I think it's only in conflict when immigrants and when Latinos start to truly ask themselves, if they're truly welcomed in those spaces. No, I am not a religious person, but I do understand the value and the power that religion has in giving people faith, particularly generations of Latinos and particularly immigrants. And so I see, in whether it's when I was in the Darien Jungle 2 years ago, or whether it's at the border or every day, I see, the power that faith has in driving people, towards survival or to make it. And so I definitely don't want to underestimate that. I do believe that a lot of these spaces have become completely corrupted by politics, and so I think it takes a certain kind of understanding of the way that people are being preyed upon on. And perhaps we're there now, perhaps one of the things that I saw a lot during this last presidential election is that for the first time, Kamala Harris had a Latino Evangelicals for Harris wing, and so I think they're sort of the Democrats are starting to understand that they have to be in those spaces. I remember during the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign, some of the staffers would ask the campaign to be in those spaces, and they kind of laughed. They were like, "Why would we be there?" So I think there kind of is now this understanding of you have to be everywhere. Not that it's a right or a left problem, but I think so long as the right, which has been investing for decades at this point in these spaces, and is brilliantly doing so, I think so long as they continue to keep up that machinery, then I think it's going to be really hard to sort of get people to discern what's truly in their interest and what's sort of a political motivation.
Another question from the audience that I think is interesting, because there's a lot of, I think, narratives and preconceptions around this as well, but the question is, how does educational attainment impact Latinos moving to the right or not?
I mean, so one of the things conversationally that I keep hearing about, particularly when I've been doing the book tour, I'll start when even thinking about kids right now. Well, first I'll start with the data. Yes, the data shows that the higher degrees of achievement, there is, according to the numbers, which again, I think this is all up for debate, there is a direct correlation between that and people voting for the Democratic Party, right? Non-college educated Latinos are, according to the numbers, more likely and have become more likely and were more likely in this last election to vote for Donald Trump, and that is a fact, no? Non-college educated have been voting more and more for Donald Trump. I've been also noticing, anecdotally, for instance, in these book tours, a lot of teachers have been coming, and they have been telling me that a lot of their kids have been starting to pick up a lot of this narrative, the narrative of the anti-immigrant narrative, and the transphobia and the homophobia, and it comes up, they say, in classes. And so I say all this because I think the power of teachers, and this is something that has become so evident in the last couple of months, is so instrumental, in at least changing that narrative. But I think definitely the numbers show, and this is true across race, no? I mean, it is Black folks and white folks and Latinos. Of course, there is a direct correlation between your degree and that. But the why, I mean, I'm not gonna say why. No, I'm not. I don't want to. I mean, that's, Go ahead.
One question that is self-serving, because our focus at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice is around disrupting cycles of violence, particular. Mm-hmm. And some of the characters in your book didn't just shift right, but shifted all the way toward being violent, toward attacking violently. And I wonder, what did you learn about what else needs to be going on in order for someone not just to shift to the right, not just to support Trump, but take a gun into a store and start shooting, or actually turn all the way to being a violent actor?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is what I noticed about these violent people is that, and I'm talking from some of the border vigilantes that I met, to, of course, the January 6th insurrectionists, to the Proud Boys. I don't know if I have the solutions. that's not, I think you can tell me the solutions. I'm gonna ask you. But I will tell you that one of the patterns that I noticed is how deeply like insecure many of these men were that I met. Who they were online and who their personas were in written articles, on Twitter, on Instagram was vastly different from the people that I met, vastly different, right? And I remember like walking into, and this happens, no? Walking into a lot of these interviews, and I get nervous, no? Because you're facing people that like fundamentally disavow perhaps of like who I am, or because I'm queer, or like, whatever it is. And so one does get nervous in that. But instantly, I noticed that so many of them were soft-spoken suddenly. They didn't actually say what they were saying online. They were just like weak and insecure. And so I say all this because I think going back to like the Enriquetarios of the world, I think they find a lot of power in the masses, they follow, and I think somewhere along those lines, they understand that if they get to the front lines, like Enrique did, and like Gabriel Garcia did when he stormed the Capitol, and like this border vigilante, Anthony Agüero, does when he drives along the US-Mexico border, the biggest reward for them, beyond violence, is the reward of white people affirming that, more than anything, right? Like Anthony Agüero, this border vigilante, what gives him so much pride is this idea, and he keeps talking about it, that Marjorie Taylor Greene once visited him at the border, and that he talks about constantly. And so, to me, that's kind of like the nuance that is interesting to me. And then, of course, I mean, to your point, I think, and please, like, educate me, like, I think perhaps then you're more prone to violence, because you feel that, and again, I'm just spitballing here, because you feel that you have to sort of prove something, you have to prove belonging, you have to prove your power, you have to prove that you belong at that, like, at the highest level of like white power. So perhaps there's something about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we find is that when people have trauma, when they've come out of chaotic situations, violence is a way of establishing control, of establishing order in their lives. It's not the way we would suggest doing it, but it's a way of saying, like, I am out of control of what's going on. I have this trauma that hasn't been dealt with in a healthy way. And so, I think there is something there in that constellation, and that insecurity is that feeling that the world is coming at you chaotically, and therefore sometimes you act in that way. I'm going to ask one last question. And then we're going to have time to have your book signed if you'd like. But you talked a little bit about this in your talk. The book is not that old. It's 2024, but, a lot has happened, as you said, since then. And I wonder, if you were to write an epilogue to bring us up to date, in the book, what have you seen? Have you seen things change? Is there new things happening? What are some of the things that, you would say, oh, I want to add this to the book now based on what's happening?
I mean, I think we're in the middle of figuring that out. I think one of the things that we're all sort of waiting for is, I think back of 2018, and sort of the height of family separation, and I feel like that moment, at least for a couple of weeks, sparked this national, like, moral collective cry, where you had moms in Ohio and people in Florida and all across the country, perhaps for the first time in that administration, like, truly understanding this, like, or feeling this, like, moral outrage, because they were hearing that cry of the moms, and they were hearing and seeing those visuals of children, and suddenly it wasn't about immigration, and it was purely about, finally, the humanity of people. And I wonder if we're reaching that point now. And my question is, and I don't know the answer, my question is, will, as we're all observing all these ICE raids, and people being deported to Venezuela, and we're finally seeing those images once again, which are a different iteration of family separation, how will we react? And I don't know the answer, but that's what I'm keeping an eye out. No, I'm thinking about the Miami-Dade County that I grew up in, no? And I'm thinking about all the Cubans and Venezuelans that voted for Donald Trump. What does it mean for them to now not have TPS? And I'm seeing that actively. You know, I'm seeing like Trump supporters, like wealthy Trump supporters that suddenly have family members that don't have temporary protected status. Will that change their mind? I'm seeing Cuban Americans look at other neighbors that are seeing the other neighbor being deported back to Cuba, the very Cuba that Donald Trump said he detests, no? The communist dictatorships that he believes or he says and promises to detest. Will that change people's mind? I want to say yes, right? I think history tells us, like during the Eisenhower years when we saw sort of this mass deportation, that there was a shift, no? That Mexican Americans at the beginning were okay with the idea of people being deported until they saw that it was also happening to Mexican citizens that were also being racially profiled, and that mistakenly some Mexican American citizens were also deported. And so I think that's where we are. I want to think that yes, we feel something, but it's a question mark right now. I don't know. I want to be like, what do you guys think? But I know we can't do that. Wait, all these questions, I want to be like, so what do you think? But I know we can't do that.
Any final thing? No. Pass the mic. Any final thoughts to leave us with?
No, I mean, I think, look, it's a time of transition. I think, like for me as a journalist, like it does. Like I would be lying if I said like it feels very dark to see everything. I think sometimes I've become very overwhelmed around like what do you cover? How do you cover it? And how do you not sensationalize the pain? Like how do you do it right? And so I just want to just sort of reiterate perhaps what a lot of people are feeling. Like it is a very hard time, no? But for me, I love that you asked me all the questions, but I find most of the answers in what I believe also the national parties don't do, no, which is look at the local folks on the ground that know what's happening, that know the communities, that know the answers, that know how to organize. And I feel like we oftentimes don't do that. And even as journalists, we come with the questions, and we never listen. And so that kind of keeps me going, and this is why, like, yes, I love to talk all day long. I don't, but I really believe in the power right now of listening carefully to perhaps like all these answers that I gave you. I'm sure you guys have a very different take based on what you're living every single day, and therein I believe like lies the answers, to make change that may feel small but is important. And I meant it when I said that, all these people that I've met, from Enrique to Gabriel, and that I meet every single day, again, I believe that they're understanding how tenuous like white power is. And I do believe, because I've seen it, when you put the cameras away from them, and you ground them, and you educate people, and you make people make sense of like, why are you feeling these things? And where does this anti-immigrant sentiment comes from? And why are you slurring these like transphobic and anti-Black words? When you break it down, which I think also is our duty, things shift, things change, things become less scary, and I think we can do that. So that's what I would say.
So I think that's a great place to leave it, because some of you have heard me say this before, but we talk a lot about at the Kroc Institute about learning with, and we do that from our research perspective, but the journalist perspective is the same. We're coming with questions, but we're listening as well. So I love that as our sort of final message. And I love how you don't just talk to your allies, but you talk to everyone. You talk to the people who, sometimes we don't like. You talk to the people who disagree with us, that don't like us, maybe even. So I love that as a sort of parting message. So. As I said, now after we close here, for those of you who want your book signed, I'll ask you to line up on the right side of the stage on this aisle, and we'll have some guides to do that. This is our last event of this academic year, but we have some fantastic events already coming together for the fall. So if you haven't, please sign up to our newsletter, and you'll be updated on the fantastic events coming up. I do want to give you all one more thank you. It is, as we don't take for granted at all the time you take to come be with us. So thank you, and please help me in giving a big warm thank you to Paola Ramos as well.